So photographically, it's obviously a very personal project to me, and I don't really have much perspective on it photographically because I'm just too close to it. But I think if I was to look at it outside, when I've talked to other people about it, whose opinions I trust, they see the growth as a photographer throughout it, but also like the cover photo. I was 14 when I shot that. And when I've told people that, they get a little shocked. And it's like, oh, it might have been good to have somebody tell me that when I was 14, that this is a good photograph. That would have been really nice, having a mentor or someone do that.
Yeah. Hey everyone, I'm Matt Payne, and this is episode 470 of F-Stop, Collaborate, and Listen. Today's conversation is a powerful one. I'm joined by Joe Doherty, a photographer whose new book, The Johnny Chronicles, documents his brother's life with Down syndrome through images spanning decades. What began as a young photographer documenting family became something much deeper. A meditation on archives, memory, influence, community, and what happens to our work if we don't take responsibility for shaping it before we're gone. This episode is about legacy, early influences, creative service, and why curating your life's work matters more than you think. Before we dive in, I want to remind you that the 6th annual Natural Landscape Photography Awards are officially open as of April 15th. If you care about honest, thoughtful, skillful nature photography, this is your competition. As always, we are committed to realistic representation of the natural world. No AI-generated imagery, no compositing, and sensitive editing is very much welcome, but integrity is everything. What's new this year? We've defined our categories to better reflect how photographers are actually working. We're continuing to elevate experimental approaches like intentional camera movement and multiple exposures within clear guidelines, and we're doubling down on feedback for entrants so that participation itself becomes a learning experience. As always, finalists undergo raw file checks, and the top work will be published in our fine art book and shared globally. If you've been waiting for the right time to enter, this is it. Head to naturallandscapeawards.com for the details. Entries are now open. All right, let's dive into my conversation with Joe Doherty. All right, Joe Doherty, it's great to finally have you on the podcast.
Thanks so much, Matt. I really appreciate being on here.
Yeah, man, you've been a long-time listener, long-time supporter of the podcast. I remember we used to have some really fun chats on a different app where it was all audio-based way back in COVID times, if people remember that app. But now here we are, face-to-face.
Yeah, it's nice. Yeah, those were interesting times because I remember going on bike rides and participating while I was writing. That was very fun.
It was fun. I wish I could keep it up, but it was just really hard to keep going, and then everyone left that platform.
Right. What are you going to do? Things have their time.
And it's so unforgettable to me that I can't even remember the name. Clubhouse. That's what it was.
Clubhouse. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, for people who aren't familiar with you and your photography, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay. I'm Joe Doherty. I am a lifelong resident of Los Angeles. I grew up in Pacific Palisades, which burned down last year. It's right between the mountains and the beach. And I spent a lot of time on both. I began shooting 35 millimeter film when I was about 13 years old. And by the time I was 16, I realized I wanted to do that for the rest of my life. So I sort of worked my way in that direction. And by the time I was 30, had a son, and I didn't have enough money. I knew that eventually I may need to support him. And so I went to school. I got a PhD. I got a job working at UCLA Law School. And about 10 years ago, I decided I would much rather be a photographer than an academic. And so I worked my way into that direction also, and along with my wife.
Nice. That's quite the journey. Very well summarized. What was it about academia that made you decide that you wanted to go back into the photography?
There wasn't anything negative about it, but I was brought in to do something new. There was something that was kind of emerging called empirical legal studies, which was social sciences brought into the study of the law. And so I was asked first to be an in-house consultant part-time, and then that eventually turned into a full-time gig. And engaged with the Rand Corporation through this, published an awful lot of articles with other people. And it just turned out that I had a real facility for doing it. I was apparently talented in it. I would never have guessed it before, but it's apparently something I do well. And so, but that kind of ran its course. After a while, there were a lot of people doing that, and it wasn't as creative or as exciting as it was before. And we it was a UC, and there was a pension sitting there, and picking up photography again made me feel things that I didn't feel for a long time after I put down the camera. And so I decided that, I've got X amount of years left in my life where I can be active, and I would much rather spend them out there than in here.
No, fair enough.
Yeah.
How would you describe your photography now? I mean, I know you've covered the gamut in terms of portraiture and events and things like that, but like, what would you say is your main passion for photography now?
So I'm trying to do a couple of things. One is basically I like photographing outdoors because I like being outdoors ever since I was a kid. And so nature and landscape, but mostly capturing the experiences of being out in places. And for a while, I was very happy just doing that and trying to be realistic but dramatic. And lately, I'm kind of going into a realistic but abstract. And so because I've still got to do the realistic and dramatic stuff and the soft things because I still love those. But I'm now trying to explore other ways of doing my work now. So Colleen Minnick got me started on in-camera movement and in-camera multiple exposure.
Yeah.
And I resisted that for so long, but she's so persuasive, and it turns out I like it. And so things like that.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I'm super jealous of people who can do in-camera multiple exposure. I'm still waiting for Sony to put it in one of their cameras. I don't even care how much it would cost. I would buy it.
Yeah. It feels like cheating because the camera is apparently doing most of it, but editing is not cheating, and post-processing is not cheating, and you're just trying to capture something. I mean, I've shot football games where like one shot out of 36 is any good. Is that cheating? No, I'm just doing what I can.
Right. Yeah. No, I've never thought of it as cheating. It's all expression and creativity and finding joy in using the camera and using it to express the way we see the world, as the way I look at it.
Yeah. It's kind of like people talk about fishing. Even on the worst day of photography, I'd much rather be out there.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm really excited to talk about your book, which
Great. Thanks.
you sent me in advance. And the day it arrived, I opened it up and I couldn't put it away. I read it from front to cover in one sitting. It was just so entertaining and interesting to me. I think it helped a little bit that I knew a little bit about you before opening the book, obviously. And I also think it helped with my own background in clinical psychology and working with people with developmental disabilities in my prior life before becoming a full-time photographer. In a nutshell, the way I would describe your book, which I think is kind of the way you describe it in the intro, is you kind of reflected back on your life as a photographer, your growth as a photographer, and used your photographs of your younger brother.
Yeah. 5 years younger. Yeah.
Yeah. Your younger brother, Johnny, who was born with Down syndrome. And you photographed his life journey and put all kinds of true and untrue twisted stories in the book. And it was just such a delight to read, and would love to hear you talk a little bit about the project, what made you embark on it, and what you hope people would get out of checking it out.
So the photographs I made were mostly because Johnny was the one who would sit still for me. I wanted to take photographs because that's what I did. That's what brought me a lot of joy early on, is that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to capture things. And when I would point my camera at other people in my family, they would turn away, or I'd get one picture and they would like take off. And John was always there, so we could play with the camera. It got to the point where I would hand him my camera so he would take a picture of me in order for me to take a picture of him. So we developed this connection through photography that I've come to realize is pretty unique for siblings. So I have all of these pictures. It's not like I would sit down and go through a roll of film photographing him doing something. It would be like that shot on the cover is just a one shot in the middle of the roll. I didn't take any other pictures of him that day.
Mm-hmm.
When COVID hit, I had long wanted to go back and rescan all of that old film. So it was tons of film from growing up. And so I did. And I realized I had a lot of pictures of Johnny that as a collection were really sort of an interesting body of work. And I didn't intend for it to go any further than the occasional Facebook post.
Right.
and sharing it with my siblings. I'm the sixth of eight. Johnny is the eighth of eight. And so I started making these Facebook posts with these stories attached to them. And then my family would jump in and they would start telling alternate stories for the same picture. Um, and, and, uh, and this sort of mythology about Johnny just emerged, and I went with it. And it turns out I have a lot of friends from childhood and from adulthood who have either siblings who are Downs or children who are Downs, or they have other experience with that. And so those pictures became really important to them, and they started encouraging me to make the book. When I committed to making the book, I realized if I'm going to do this, I really got to do it right. So I had to go back in and re-image everything. I hired a professional designer, my friend Hall Kelly, to lay it out. We searched for printing companies that do top-notch work, and produced it. So it was, that's kind of how it came about. It was initially just John would sit still for me, and now we have the book.
I love that. I didn't personally have a lot of exposure to individuals with Down syndrome until my last job, which I had for 5 years. And I worked for a nonprofit that provided services to adults with developmental disabilities, and probably about half of them maybe were people with Down syndrome. Man, they're so full of joy and mystery, and they're so fascinating to talk to. And their perspective on the world is really infectious in a lot of ways. Like if you're having a bad day, just go spend some time with them, and you'll be like, they see life so much differently than most people do. It was funny, coming home from Norway just 2 days ago. I was in a tiny rural airport in the middle of nowhere, Norway, Svolvær. And for whatever reason, the flight that I was on also coincided with like a group of families with their children with Down syndrome going to the next city over. And so the whole airport area where the gate was full of guys and girls with Down syndrome, and they were talking to each other and laughing, and it was just full of joy for the whole day. It was just it was amazing, and I was just brought back to that by reading your book in terms of just how enriching it must have been going through all these images and reliving the experiences you had with your brother, with your family. I bet that was a really awesome project to work on.
It was awesome. It was also very bittersweet because we were losing Johnny at the time that I started this. Dementia started setting in his early 50s. Mm-hmm. And then in April of 2022, he passed away. So about a year after I started the scanning and the stories. I think one of the interesting things about it is even the introduction, which has some people said, I can't believe you printed that. My family agrees with everything that's in the book. Nobody had any objections to it. And they thought the stories were, that pretty much captures Johnny. One of the facilities that he went to, the Arc of Ventura County, for several years, he would introduce himself as Marty McFly to anyone who came in, because that was, that's who he wanted to be that week. And he wouldn't answer to any other name. So he would keep these fantasies going in his head because that's, and everybody else just rolled with it because Johnny was adorable.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And speaking of, I want to come back to this. In Grand Junction at the Botanical Garden, the store is staffed by Down syndrome people. They have one person there who manages them. But we went there and it was hilarious because they grew up in a time where educating people with Down syndrome from early on was the norm. And when Johnny was born, none of that existed. So John didn't learn to spell until he was 10. Or to read, or to do any kind of math. But now when they start it early, you get people who are, I don't want to say normal because they're normal too, but people who can engage other people at a much higher level. And the humor of it and the absurdity of it comes out even more. For
sure. If you haven't ever spent time with someone with Down syndrome, I really encourage people to do it because it's very enriching, I think.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. They have absolutely no shame, no self-consciousness, and there is no such thing as failure. There's just doing it again.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, it's very
a great
inspiring.
Worldview. Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So why was photographing him so foundational in your upbringing as a photographer? What did you get out of doing that in terms of gaining skills and perspectives?
That's a great question. So having a subject who would regularly pose for you was important as I would become aware of different techniques or different, lighting or some other way of photographing things, like learning depth of field Well, I could go out and take a picture of, something still, or I could open up the lens to 1.8 and try to do a close-up of Johnny. And that was always much more interesting. Doing studio work, I could take a picture of a bell pepper, or I could get Johnny in front of the camera. And so it became part of my process to try out the new things that I learned on him. And then it got more into storytelling. And so John was always up for putting on a costume or taking on a character. And so if I wanted to tell a story about him or just make a picture that might be, an album cover, when I was 19 years old, I wasn't shooting album covers, but something that might look like one, he was in front of the camera. And so he was my muse as I became more proficient in my craft and more interested in what I was doing. I don't know that I would have progressed as fast or been as interested in doing photography if he hadn't been there.
Right. Yeah. And it was interesting reading through the book, the way that you constructed it and sequenced it. You have kind of these vignettes of situations or stories that, Johnny would find himself in. Like one was like he would regularly just go wandering off into the Palisades and you guys would have to go look for him and find him. And so you have a picture of him kind of in that environment in a place where you kind of just found him. And I just thought that must have been such an interesting upbringing. Like, well, we got to go find our brother again. He's wandering around in the hills.
Well, and there is no truth to that story whatsoever, but I'm glad it engaged you. That picture was actually shot against a fence at his school when he lived in the Palisades. You can see over his shoulder, there's the Mayfair Market, which is now the Gelson's, which just burned down. Palisades High School baseball field. If you know what you're looking for, you know exactly where that is, and it's not getting lost up in the mountains. But the story concludes with us finding him at the Bay Theater, where he would go in and bum Diet Cokes from people. Now, him going around and bumming Diet Cokes from strangers is true. He would do that in the bus depot when he was transferring between, coming home from his job or going out to his job. He would go up to people and hit them up for money for a Diet Coke. So he could be very charming, but at the same time, it told a story about growing up in the Palisades because we were pretty wild. We left the house at 8 o'clock in the morning in the summers and didn't come home till 10. And so that part was true. That was life growing up there.
That's awesome. So I know in the book you'd mentioned that John wasn't expected to come home from the hospital, and yet he did. And his presence brought all of you and your siblings closer together during a really difficult time. It sounds like, based on what I read in the book, like you guys had a pretty fascinating upbringing with two alcoholic parents and just a lot going on in that household.
Yeah.
How did photographing your brother help you understand your family and yourself as a young photographer?
So I don't think I had any perspective on it at the time. It's really only in retrospect that I can see what was going on there. I'm not a person who feels feelings in the moment, and certainly wasn't back then, because there was entirely too much chaos going on in the household and it's kind of life in general. So I was just trying to navigate, staying safe. Looking back on it, I can see that the John with us and having the people that were like him who became part of our community and we became part of theirs really taught us a lot about empathy, because John was just purely a ball of fun and love and absurdity. And you couldn't get mad at him. You couldn't, because it didn't do any good. And what he was doing was just very, very funny. So outside the norm. I mean, I have this analogy to what John brought to us. My dad was a Harvard educated lawyer. My mom wanted to be a socialite. For the first 7 of us growing up, and what you were going to do with your life was like being in a bowling alley with the bumpers up. No matter what you did, the ball was going to hit the pins, because that was life back then. And John came along and he dropped the bumpers and he erased the lanes. So pretty much anywhere we threw the ball was going to hit something. And we were allowed to throw the ball anywhere because Johnny was Johnny. Johnny kind of opened that up. And so we became more like ourselves in the process of accepting Johnny and his community into our family. And that also gave us empathy for each other. We're still a very close family. A group chat with my siblings yesterday because my brother Ted just turned 70. It's really obvious that we like each other a lot, which certainly isn't true for a lot of families that I grew up with. Right. And I think that Johnny played a big role in that.
Yeah. Relating to the photography side of things, I was curious, obviously working on these images, and looking back on them has given you some perspective. But I'm curious that, like, when did you realize that so much meaningful work risks simply disappearing if we don't shape it? Like, if we don't do something with it, if we don't put it into a book or create a project out of it?
It's a great question. I've always kind of worried about that because I've always thought that things being in print was important, and having a way to, all the way back to the acid-free boxes that you would store prints in, and making sure that everything is washed completely to get the fixer out of it so they'll stay, archival. But it's not until the last few years that the tools and the costs have gotten to the place where it's possible to do it on a mass scale. And I think that's important because none of us is going to live forever. If you wanted to have some institution take over your work and archive it, you have to give them several $1 million just as an endowment to do that. So that's not going to happen. And so you have to find a way yourself to get these things out, not because it's not an ego thing. It's not an ego thing. I took the pictures when I took them because I wanted to take them. But as with the Johnny pictures, other people love them too, and they mean things to other people. And so being able to put them somewhere where other people can see them matters to me. The pictures that I took growing up in the Palisades was the same thing. After the fire, suddenly those became really important documents to people. To me, they're just the pictures I took because I wanted to. So putting things in an archive and in a place where people can access them later is important to me.
Yeah, me too. I think it's something people should think a little bit more about intentionally in terms of what that looks like, what they want to do with the images, what they want to say with their work. Because as you said, like, people are going to get different things out of it.
Yeah.
Like even me, look, I don't know Johnny, right? But like, I enjoyed reading the book because I have my own experiences that I could relate to. And so I found it really entertaining, but also just super uplifting, and weaving in the photography side of things as well. Like, it was just a really awesome experience going through the book.
Well, on that point, my friend Jane Morris, who is an improv teacher, and she's actually kind of helping me put together a speech for if I go give book talks. One of the first things she said to me is, you don't own them anymore. These pictures don't belong to you anymore. They belong to people who read the book. And so with that in mind, it is what you bring to it. It's not, I can't force anyone to see it the way I do.
Yeah. I think that's an important thing to keep in the back of our minds when we create work, and trying not to impose too much of our own will on the audience.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Yeah. So looking back at those early images from the 1970s, how do you see your photographic voice beginning to form through the act of documenting John's life?
I think from the beginning, I was always looking for clarity. I was always looking for capturing a moment, developing craft in service of doing that. So I think I don't have any great artistic or stylistic ambitions. My purpose is always to try to capture what's in front of me. And as I've gotten older, I've realized that what's in front of me sometimes doesn't exist in a 500th of a second. Sometimes it exists over 5 seconds. But I'm always trying to hone my craft in order to be able to capture what's in front of me. And I think that period, from everything from shooting sports to shooting backstage at the theater to photographing John just interacting with his friends, was all part of the storytelling craft that I was developing back then. And every situation required a new sort of reset of the tools that I was using. And so it was my voice was the different sort of octaves of photography craft that I was developing.
I love that you said storytelling, because it's something I think we can get a lot out of as photographers, especially as it relates to visiting new places or going on various trips. And it's advice I always give to people on a workshop is try to tell a story about your experience there, about what you saw, the way that you saw it. Get 6 to 10 images that tell different perspectives of the story that you want to tell about that place or about your experience there. And I was curious, having gone through the process of seeing this collection of work as a collection of stories or doing storytelling, how has that translated into the way that you photograph outdoor photography? Like, what are the ways in which you're trying to do that storytelling piece in your landscape and nature photos?
That's a terrific point. Initially, when I started back into photography, I'll give you an example from a workshop I did. It was Jerry Dottrell and Jim Stimpson in the Eastern Sierra for winter. It was January, and our first trip was to the Alabama hills. So we were out there, and I thought I had framed a very nice photograph of, some rocks with Mount Whitney in the background, and there was some snow and some sun and all of these things. And I showed it to Jim, and Jim said, well, that's kind of a really nice natural history picture. You could probably get in a textbook somewhere. And I'm like, no, I don't want that. I want something more. And so he has since apologized for saying that. And I say, no, you don't need to apologize for that. That was very important to hear because I wasn't telling a story about the place. I was just recording it. And so it was, after that, it became important to me to say, okay, what do I like about this place? What is my takeaway from this place? It doesn't always have to be important or great. I've come away with a lot of not great photographs from really great places, but it is my take on it. And for that, I need to be more aware of my circumstances and what I'm feeling at the time. So the personal nature of the photographs in the book and of the photographs I took during that time. I mean, I was the high school photographer, so I was everybody saw me with a camera because I had one every single day. All of the pictures from that time are me existing in that place and capturing what that was like. And so now when I go out to shoot in nature, I'm trying to replicate that. What am I doing here? And I think that's how it relates to what I'm doing now.
I love that. Can you give a more specific example of like you gave the example of Mount Whitney, the rocks, snow, sunlight.
Yeah.
If you're trying to tell a story, how then are you like in that place? I mean, I think a lot of people know Alabama Hills. How would you have done it differently in order to tell a story? What does that look like?
I may not have been able to tell a story that day, but on that same workshop, we went to a hot creek. I don't know if you've been there. And it was about 12 degrees outside. And so it was very cold, but this warm water is coming down the creek. And it's dark out. We're waiting for the sunrise to come. And so I'm looking for a foreground, the water with steam, and then the mountain covered with snow behind the bridge. And that told for me a story about how cold it was and how severe that environment was. But it was also a really pretty picture of the sunrise. And so we were there at that moment, and I thought that would have been a much better story than just capturing the mountain and the stream and having everything sort of in proportional relation to each other. This was more of a near-far shot.
Yeah. I think it's a fun exercise to go through in terms of figuring out how to have a little bit more intention behind the images, because I think it can then drive you to look for other things that maybe aren't as obvious or might be more just personal. Like you notice stuff that I'm not going to see and vice versa. And
Absolutely.
that's, I think, how we differentiate ourselves is by showing off what we notice in a way that's interesting. Maybe only 6% of the viewers are going to find it interesting as well, but that's fine with me.
I will tell you something that I taught my students at the law school, because I taught statistics and research design to law students who are people that are not naturally drawn to statistics. If they knew statistics, they would have gone to med school, is one thing one told me. That no matter how good your article is, no matter how good your paper is, at most 5 people will read it, because all of these articles are very narrow casting. If you get 500 people to read your article as a professor, that's like tenure worthy, because there just aren't that many people interested in it. It still moves knowledge. You're still advancing what people know. And I think it's the same with photography. I don't need 1 billion likes on social media. I am interested in the likes to see who comes up and likes something that I don't normally see liking my work, and knowing who they are and what that may mean to them, that they've seen my work. But I'm not counting likes. I'm posting the pictures because I want people to see it. If they don't see it, I blame Zuckerberg, but,
Right.
but, it's not, but it doesn't matter to me that much.
Yeah, it really shouldn't, especially the more you niche down on your images. And like if your thing is like macro photos of rocks, whatever, like might only be like 100 other people in the world that think that's cool, but man, I guarantee once they find your stuff, they're going to really, really like it. So I think it's important to keep that in mind.
Yeah, you have to be aware that there's an audience out there, and it may be small, but there are people who appreciate what you're doing.
Yeah.
And a larger audience that may like what you're doing, that really doesn't help you advance that far as a photographer.
Yeah. So let's talk about your early inspirations. You'd mentioned in our correspondence that your early influences were incredibly formative, from Life magazine and Time magazine and photographers in the group F64, which is like, Ansel Adams and Imogen Cunningham and
Yeah.
all that fun stuff, and people working in labs straight out of high school, which is you and your
Yeah.
peers. How did being immersed in both bad photography and great photography sharpen your eye so early?
Yeah, that's really a fun question. So the Time and Life stuff, there's a Life library of photography that was published back in the early 70s. And you can probably still find it at bookstores, used bookstores. And it had some wonderful stuff in it. W. Eugene Smith and Eisenstadt and Ernst Haas and Avedon and Irving Penn. And it just had this magnificent range across all of these books with explanations for why they did it and how they did it. And as a 14-year-old, that was just gold because
No
I didn't
doubt.
know I didn't know anybody who did this stuff. There was a photographer who was the dad of some kids I went to school with who was one of those guys, but I didn't know him. And so I couldn't go to, and he didn't know me. And so I couldn't go and say, hey, what's going on here? So I was kind of just trying to educate myself about what these things looked like. And at the same token, you've got the Group F, and I knew that their work was great because it said so in the book, among other things. But I had actually seen, like my friend George, his family had an Ansel Adams print in the house. It wasn't one of his famous ones, but it was an Ansel, and it was like there's a quality there that you don't see other places. The Time and Life stuff was very formative for me because they were trying to do what I was doing, which was trying to capture real life as technically as possible with design and composition and storytelling. That was really important to me. And so that was I could follow that. But then I tried to shoot a bell pepper and I'm like, what the hell is this? So I've got a picture of a bell. Is that all Edward Weston was doing? And then my first trip to Yosemite, I set up my 4x5. I had plus X film. I had a number 25 Ratten filter, and I'd take a picture of half dome. And it was terrible. It was properly exposed, but I've never shown it to anybody. And years later, I was telling Jerry Dodrell that story about that picture. And he says, well, at least you knew it was terrible. A lot of people wouldn't. And so that kind of set a baseline for me about, so there's something more than just being F8 and being there and making sure that you get the shot. Because that's kind of how I was trained as an editorial photographer was you got to be there and get it. And you can compose it any way you want, but the thing you're getting is what's in front of you. And then with the Group F64 and the other artist, it was like, oh yeah, there's something deeper going on here. There's longer amounts of time spent trying to capture that one thing. And that was kind of revelatory to me as I got older.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, I'm sure you're familiar with John Sexton, but he was the keynote speaker at Out of Yosemite in 2020. And I was one of the instructors there as well, which is laughable to me that I was put on the same stage as John Sexton, but that's a whole other situation. But he said that something that I'll never forget, and I always say this to other people, and it's, I'm not a better photographer than you. I've just taken many, many, many more bad photographs than you have,
Yeah.
And I think that's so true. Like you have to go through the process of making bad images and looking at a lot of images and really immersing yourself in the craft to fully appreciate the difference between a bad image, a poor image, an okay image, a good image, a great image, and a like full-on freak show masterpiece that you'll never, ever, ever be able to replicate.
Right. And you have to be comfortable with the fact that you're never going to be that good. Or you're never going to be in that place. You're never going to do that. And so being comfortable with that is also a part of maturing as an artist, that it's great, which is good for you, because a lot of people don't know it's great. You just know that your work is terrible. And eventually, if you keep working at it, you'll get there. I mean, it's important to have a mentor who can tell you, it's not great, but you're getting there. Because if you don't have that person, people tend to give up.
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, a lot of people use social media as the measuring stick. And I got to tell you, like, I'm in some Facebook groups where some really bad images are shared of some really pretty places, overexposed, shitty composition, just not well done, of a place that I know very well. And it gets 2,000 likes in the Facebook group.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, the general public is just not that discerning when it comes to this stuff. And you can't use that as a measuring stick.
No. That's. I've had this conversation with many people. It's why I never shot weddings, because I really only want people who know what they're buying to hire me. And most people, they have no idea.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
And with that being said, I know that I'm not like the best photographer on earth. I just know a good photo when I see one.
Exactly. Yeah. And I feel really lucky when I am in a situation where I can make a photo like that. But
Totally.
I know that it's just a lot of it's just luck.
Yeah. Well, let's see. What's the quote? Luck favors the prepared mind. That's a Louis Pasteur quote.
Yeah.
And to me, that's my mantra when it comes to this stuff, is like, you can prepare, as long as you prepare as much as you possibly can, put yourself into really cool places at the right time. That's about as best as you can do.
Yeah. And be prepared for surprises. When you stumble across something, make sure that your battery is charged and you've got a good card in the camera and the right lens is handy, because you may only have a minute.
And keep your head on a swivel, because you never know, inspiration might be behind you on the ground 6 feet away.
Yeah.
While you're staring at this amazing sunrise light. Oh my gosh, look back there, how the ice is reflecting that sunlight.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And that the light's just skimming the ground there, and all of these things that have the rime ice on it are suddenly glowing. Yeah.
Exactly.
Things like that. Yeah.
Yep. All right. So I know that you had mentioned that you've worked really closely with some photography legends, including Julius Schulman, Harry Langdon Jr., Rob, I don't even know some of these people, but Rob Levin, Rob Lewin, Chaz Gerritsen. What did those experiences teach you about professionalism, craft, and longevity in photography?
Well, I never worked with Julius Schulman. The lab that I worked in, I was responsible for making his presentation slides. He would give us 4x5 transparencies of his work. And if you don't know Julius Schulman, he is a famous architecture photographer. The photographs of Los Angeles architecture, the Richard Neutra houses and things like that, those are almost all him. He made those houses famous because he was a brilliant photographer. He was also quite a character. He would haul in trailers full of plants and furniture to populate the house in the way that he thought it should be. But his stuff would arrive, and I had never seen anything like that. It was my job to take those 4x5 transparencies and make 35 slides out of them. And I'd never seen anything of that quality. I never held it in my hands. And so that was, compared to most of the stuff that came through the lab, that was kind of transformative. It's like, the quality here is amazing. What magazines can't print out of something this amazing. There's just a translation between the two. With Harry Langdon, Harry was a celebrity photographer. He was really at the top of his game when I went to work. I was lucky to get a job like sweeping floors and carrying cases. And what I learned from Harry was that the relationship with the client is really important. Harry was very charismatic. People loved him, but also he worked his ass off. I mean, he did his own printing and retouching, and that just kept him in his studio for hours and hours and hours after we all left. But he kept it up. He was very formative for me in learning. That kind of work went into it. You didn't just shoot it and send it off and then have somebody else do the rest of the business. Rob Lewin is still my friend. We still get together. He was shooting for a lot of publications back then, a lot of Time Incorporated, Smithsonian. I mean, it was a lot of varied work. Like we would be shooting the Huntington Gardens and Library for Smithsonian Magazine, and then maybe 2 weeks later be in Florida working on the movie Spring Break because they, to shoot their poster. And so it was a huge variety of stuff. And from Rob, I learned how to be very flexible when you arrive at a situation to get the shot, and that you can do as much planning as you want, but it's not really going to pan out. You have to be able to accommodate things. And also he was technically very, very good. He was the first guy I ever saw use a level on his Nikon to make sure that the shot was level. And that was, because Life magazine, if it was tilted, they would know. You didn't do that in post. Chaz was a very interesting character. We're still in contact on Facebook. Chaz won the Robert Capa Award for his coverage in Chile. There's a very famous photograph of Augusto Pinochet with his arms crossed, wearing his sunglasses, that Chaz shot, which is probably one of the great editorial portraits of the 20th century. And he was also a combat photographer. And then he came to Hollywood. His first movie was Apocalypse Now.
Huh.
And What I learned from Chaz was how to shoot for a publication, because there's just some things you have to do every time. You shoot wide, middle, close up, and you shoot horizontal and vertical. And every setup has to have some dynamism to it, because editors need to fill space, and they need a picture of a certain size to fill space. And so that's where your picture went. I didn't mention there my friend Dennis Keeley, who I worked in that lab with. Dennis ended up being the head of the photography department at Art Center. And he is an incredibly thoughtful photographer. And he's still writing about the art of photography. And he amazes me. I wish I could think as deeply about this stuff as Dennis does. He's really, really quite exceptional.
As you were talking, it occurred to me that so many of us take for granted the influences that we've had, the positive influences we have in our photography journeys, and really putting some thought into what those influences have given us. And the flip side of that is like showing gratitude for those influences and then sharing the knowledge to other people so that that type of knowledge can get carried forward to other people who are also learning and trying to figure out how to do this stuff for the first time. So I think everything you just said is super important, and it's probably a really important exercise for people to undertake.
Yeah, I think there's a huge recency bias in who influences your work. There certainly is in academia. You could look through an article and find nothing that's more than 10 years old. But the things that you're talking about might have been discussed 30 years ago. You'll just never find it because the literature is all recent. And I think the same is true in photography. We all want to do what somebody else did last year. We show up to a site that somebody else photographed, and we want to do that instead of understanding the work that people did 40 years ago and the difficulties they went through to get that image and what it meant at the time. So yeah, I think it's important to go back into history and recognize those as influences.
Yeah, yeah. So I want to go back full circle to an earlier part of our conversation where you talked about your career in law school stuff. And I know you were super deep in photography, then you completely stepped out of it to raise your family and pursue your academic career. What did that long detour give you that you brought back into photography later?
A lack of fear about having people look at my work. I was no longer worried about criticism of anything I was doing. When I left photography, it was because I couldn't see a path forward in my work, and I didn't know if I'd ever get another client. And there was an overwhelming fear in the belief that I had to monetize everything, and so I couldn't do anything interesting. And when I came back to it through my academic work, it was like, no, this can be really collegial, and you can actually have some joy in it, and you can talk to people about your work and not worrying about getting destroyed. And you should make sure that the people of whom you're asking their opinion are likely to give you an opinion that matters, that can help you, which I think is true in photography in spades. It's good to get people's ideas about your work, but there just aren't that many people who are familiar enough with what you're trying to do to give you a good judgment about whether you're succeeding or not.
Yeah, and to your point, I think it's really important that we put effort and energy into caring about the critique from the right people. I think so often people get hung up on someone they don't even know giving advice or criticism of their photography, who maybe they don't even like the genre that you're photographing, right? It's like, why put any effort into caring what those people say when you could intentionally seek out feedback from people that you trust, people's work that you value, that you find inspiring, and get their take on your work, right?
Right. Yeah. It's that intentionality that matters, I think, a lot, because once you realize what you intended to do, then it's possible to say, okay, now this is the feedback I want. If you're just looking for people's reaction, they may not give you the reaction that helps you. So I always make sure, okay, I did an image review with Adam Shallow.
Sure.
7 years ago. And I took him a portfolio of Southwest photographs, because that's Adam. And I said, are these colors right? Do these prints, is this the right color for the Southwest? And that's the question I had for him. We had some other great conversations around it, but I had that one question because it's a very particular color.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and you also mentioned the fact that back then you were super worried about the commercial viability of your work and monetization, and everything had to be monetized. And I'm guessing that now you're not necessarily as worried about that in terms of your photography pursuits.
Yes. Yeah.
And I'd love to hear about how that has freed you up to pursue work that doesn't necessarily have commercial viability and what that's meant for your photography journey.
I still want to sell things. I want people to value my work enough to put money down for it. I don't want to undersell anyone who makes their living off of it. So I tend to price my things maybe higher than I should, but I don't care. Somebody wants it, they want it, and they'll buy it. But it frees me to not have to sell it in order to pay the mortgage. If I can pay off this printer back here by making prints and selling them, then we're good, then it's a wash. And so I'm happy with that. If I can make enough money to pay off half of our diesel bill for our truck, then that's great. The main principle is never sell anything for a loss and only put out work that you think is high quality enough that you're proud if somebody hangs it on their wall. But I'm very, very fortunate to not have to worry about making money at this, because that was really a soul crusher for me when I was younger.
Yeah, I see it all the time. And I think it's going to sound cliche, but like as you get older and you have more experiences in life, you gather wisdom. And I think one of the things that you can gather in terms of wisdom is an appreciation for the fact that making money in photography is incredibly difficult, and you don't necessarily have to do it in order to make it a very big part of your life. And I think I see so many people engaging in photography in their 20s and 30s and really wanting to make a career out of it, not having thought about what that will mean in terms of their relationship with photography.
Yeah. And it's, the culture from back then is different now. Back then, people got into it in their late teens, 20s. They went to art school. They pursued a career in photography, checking the boxes, pushing the buttons, going to the art directors, getting clients. And it was sort of a process, but you started it early because, as the photographer Tony Costa said to me, it takes about 7 years from the first time People magazine sees your work to the time they hire you, because there's a bunch of people ahead of you that have to be swept out. And now you're next, so it takes you have to have a lot of staying power. You're an example of someone who, like a lot of people have been guests on your show, who had careers completely different and who entered photography later, who may never have exposed a roll of film in their lives. Everything is now sort of the modern stuff, and the tools that you gain, the socialization from being in a corporate atmosphere or in academia or whatever, is something that sort of filters out into our photography community now in a way it never did back then. Mm-hmm. It was unusual to have coffee with the people who were your competitors because they were competitors and you're all going after the same jobs.
Interesting. Yeah, that is way different.
Yeah. And so now, it's like, let's meet up for a beer when I'm traveling through.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or like, let's go to this location and photograph together and have fun. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And for whatever reason, I've never had the perspective of seeing other people who photograph the types of things that I photograph as competition, unless they do it in a way that's completely different to me and use marketing techniques that I find unethical, like literally just lying about the image and stuff like that. But if you're just doing the same stuff I'm into and you're a nice person, like I don't see you as competition at all. You know what I mean? In fact,
right.
I want you to do well, because if you're doing well, it means I'm probably doing well as well. So that is and of course, back in the day, you had a image catalog of 5,000 to 10,000 stock images. I mean, you could make $150,000 a year just on stock images, that ship has long gone.
Yeah, it killed a lot of people's businesses. I know two who that was their whole livelihood, and then it disappeared overnight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you gotta pivot, or I guess get a job at Home Depot or something,
Something, yeah. Go back, work in a lab, or start teaching classes.
Right, totally.
Something, yeah. Yeah, because there's almost no value in the pictures you shot back then anymore.
Right. Yeah.
Unless they're news events or celebrities.
Sure. All right, so you had mentioned in our correspondence that you had a 2011 Eastern Sierra trip that you described as, quote, the beginning of the end trip. Yeah. And I was curious if you could tell us what changed on that trip and why did photography suddenly feel non-negotiable again?
Yeah. So we had never been to the Eastern Sierra in the fall. We had been there in the summer. to go to Mammoth to go hiking, but never in the winter and never in the fall. And we didn't know anybody up there. And I just thought that for our wedding anniversary weekend, it would be really fun to go up there and see this place. It was to late October. And G. Dan Mitchell's book on photographing the fall colors in the Eastern Sierra had not come out. And so we were just sort of inventing it. And I read somewhere that being at Lake Sabrina at sunrise is a really good place to be if you're going to do this. So we drive up to Bishop. It was about 4.5 hours, and we get a room in a fairly cheap hotel. And well before dawn, we're in the car driving up 168. And at the top of 168 is Lake Sabrina. It's still very, very dark. We got our headlamps on. And we hike out on this fishing trail to go out somewhere. We can barely see the outline of the mountains, and then the glow starts to come up, and these yellow mountains start to appear. And Velda sort of got it first because she was like, "Oh my God, this was amazing." She still vibrates on that. I have a picture of her when we were having coffee in the cafe later, where she's just looking out the window like this, like, how do we stay here? And then a couple of days later, we were at Silver Lake, and there's a copse of trees at the north end of Silver Lake, and underneath it was this completely untrampled grass. It was long-bladed grass that had fallen over, and there were yellow aspen leaves dotting it, but the trees were still full. And I looked at it, and I immediately knew what the shot was. I had to get really low with my ultra-wide-angle lens and shoot up into the trees. And that was like, oh yeah, how can I do this forever? I've been missing this. The idea of knowing the shot, having the intention, going out and executing it. And there's lots of technical problems with that image, but it was the first time where I was like, oh, yeah, I've missed this. I want to get back to this. So yeah, in retrospect, that was kind of the beginning of the end. And it was a good way to start it.
And the end meaning your normal career.
Yeah. Retire. 5 years later, we were in our camper in Ouray.
Yeah, and have you experienced fall color in Colorado yet?
Yeah, we've been to Ouray multiple times.
Yeah.
And
good stuff.
Yeah. The last time we were there, we were up in Owl Creek Pass, and it's like, what are we going to shoot now? Because we've already done all this before, and then we did more.
I could go to Owl Creek Pass every year for the rest of my life and not get bored up there. So that's me, though.
Yeah. I mean, you've shot up there a lot. What's your favorite spot up in Ouray?
I can't tell you that.
That's fair enough.
It's a little difficult to get to, but it's a pretty special spot. I haven't been up there in a few years now. I need to get back in there this coming year because it's just magic. Even if I don't get a photo there, it's just a really special location. I've got probably 3 images from that specific location in my book. Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing in there. All right, I kind of want to do a little bit more digging on this comparison between old school and new school, because you have the perspective of living in both worlds, and I think it can help people think more intentionally about their place in the current world, which is very chaotic. So yeah. Compared to the competitive commercial photography world of the 1980s, you found today's nature and fine art photography communities far more generous. What do you think shifted culturally within photography since then?
Well, as I said earlier, I think part of it is that people entering photography now seriously are often coming in after a career in something else. And so they're more mature in what they expect and in their socialization, and there's less fear that somehow they're giving up an advantage to someone else if they socialize with them, if they share things with them. Like Harry Langdon had a custom-built umbrella made for his studio. It was kind of parabolic, and it was made out of a silver lame. You don't normally find umbrellas. And there was a tour from Art Center coming in, and Harry switched out his umbrella so they wouldn't see it. Stuff like that. Little things that you think are your advantages. We don't see that anymore. I don't see that kind of fear about what you're doing mattering so much as the fact that you're creating it, and everybody's vision is going to be different. Maybe it's because the internet and everything else is so awash with great photography that everyone realizes they're just part of that. So I think that might be about the difference of it, is that the fear of losing work to someone else back then was really, really high.
Yeah. I think there's still some truth in some of that, though. I mean, like with YouTube especially, there are people out there just giving away really, really, really good information that probably should be like a 3-day workshop kind of a situation.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
like the more of that happens, the more we're kind of putting ourselves out of work in terms of like if you can easily access everything you ever would need to know about how to take a really great photograph and every possible awesome way to do it and easily access it for free, like at some point there's going to be no way to monetize photography. And I
Yeah.
think it is a challenge feel like we face in this space because we talked earlier, I mean, stock photography is gone. So a lot of people pivoted to education, but as education becomes more and more accessible, that's no longer going to be as commercially viable. I mean, we're already seeing that space is super competitive. There's so many people doing workshops now. And
Yeah.
so it's like at some point, there's not going to be any way to make money in photography. And that's kind of
Yeah.
a weird challenge to face.
But I expect that you see return people from your workshops who come back because you taught it.
We do.
Right?
We do. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's, that's kind of the challenge now. I mean, I had clients back in the day who I shot for years, and then other ones were just one-offs. And so I had to count on the returning clients on a regular basis. They were sort of important to me, to my business. And so you build a business around those repeated relationships.
Mhm.
And it's not about the techniques that you teach. It's the fact that they want to learn them from you. I mean, Jerry Dodderell is my ride or die guy. I think I trust Jerry's opinion on everything. He is a great teacher and just a really, really nice guy. And I don't think that I would be where I am right now, except for a couple of early workshops I took with him, where his insights into what I was doing were what I needed to hear. And that was important. And I think that is probably not atypical for people who go to your workshops. Some people are coming in and they're learning things from you. And that are things that are really important, learning things about themselves,
Mm-hmm.
overcoming their fears.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. That I think the other differentiator that you have some control over is having a really good experience and having the knowledge of locations and when to be there and different, like all of that stuff. But even that's starting to become democratized to some degree in terms of like people selling location guides and GPS coordinates to every possible place on Earth and things like that. So I think,
Yeah.
and then there's a lot of people afraid about AI too, but I think AI will never be able to replace photography's ability to fully immerse you in a place and to give you an experience that is not something you can replicate in any other way. And I think that experience-driven approach to photography is probably the key differentiator in my mind.
I think that's right. You can have the experience and turn out the work, or you can go to AI and just turn out the work. And I think that people are willing to pay to have the experience and to actually feel something about the work.
Yeah, exactly. So along those same lines, I know that you recently returned from a 67-day road trip across the country.
Yeah.
How does extended time on the road influence your sense of pace, attention, and photographic intention?
We have problems when we're on the road because we need to get from point A to point B kind of on a daily basis, and we don't have a lot of time to stop sometimes. And so there were a few places where we were able to stop for multiple days, and you always end up with problems on the road, like a computer crashing that you got to, find the Apple store in Minneapolis to fix it. And so there's things that happen along the way that sort of interrupt whatever flow you might be in. But also there are places that we see that we would never have encountered before, and people that we meet we never would have encountered before. And so there are opportunities out there for things like the Northern Lights from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, completely unexpected. The people we met there texted me at 5 minutes to midnight and said, the Northern Lights are going off now, you should get out of bed, which is something we wouldn't have had if we were just camping somewhere. Becomes harder to get it to be intentional, though, when you only have 2 or 3 days in one spot.
Mm-hmm.
We met up with Jeffrey Tadlock in the Great Smokies for a day, but we only had the day. We had been there for 2 days already, but it's not nearly enough time to try to appreciate the place.
Right.
So a trip like that with 10,000 miles is more of a scouting trip than anything that's going to produce anything great. We got some nice things along the way, but, like we would never have gone into Shenandoah National Park without that. It would never have been a destination, but we'll go back there again.
It's almost like the Costco sampler platters where you try different places and you're like, okay, now I know this is a place that I want to come back to in the future and spend a lot more time here.
Yeah. I think that's right. And that was a big part of the trip. We had been promising each other to take a cross-country trip for 30 years. It just never panned out. So this year it panned out.
That's awesome. Yeah. So Shenandoah, that sounds like a really fun trip. And I'm with you. Like I would have never put that on my radar either.
I highly recommend it. It's really interesting because the Skyline Drive goes up and down through elevations. And so you're driving through early fall, full fall, and late fall, just as you change elevation.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah. And then it's just like a razorback. And so you're looking off to the west and to the east. It's a fantastic place. I highly recommend it.
It kind of sounds a little bit like Blue Ridge Parkway.
It's like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I was very pleasantly surprised with when I went there what was that, last spring? I just went there for a few days to scout for Taylor for her upcoming workshop because I needed to look to see what was destroyed by the hurricane. But I had never been there before, and I was like, wow, this is actually amazing.
It's incredible country. I've always seen it on the satellite pictures of this. It looks like this big sort of claw going down through the Appalachians, and it's like, boy, what great country.
Yeah. And to your point, like the elevation changes and the perspectives you can get, and like you're at this elevation and you get this kind of foliage and it's in this state of changing. Or I was in there in spring, so like things were just starting to bud at the higher elevations, which was really cool to see. So yeah, it's nice to do it in spring or fall.
Yeah, it was very neat. And if we don't take a trip like that, we don't know about it. We're not going to read about it in a guidebook. And that's another reason to do it is, the Great Smokies were just jammed. There was people everywhere. There was not that many people in Shenandoah. We got to an overlook for sunrise, and there was 2 other people there.
Nice.
Yeah, it was nice.
That sounds very good compared to what you can experience in the Smokies.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So Joe, as you look ahead to the rest of 2026, you've got exhibitions, talks, and your book, The Johnny Chronicles, as a sole point of focus. What do you hope people take away from engaging with this body of work, both photographically and from the human perspective?
Okay, so photographically, it's obviously a very personal project to me and I don't really have much perspective on it photographically because I'm just too close to it. But I think if I was to look at it outside, when I've talked to other people about it, whose opinions I trust, they see the growth as a photographer throughout it, but also like the cover photo, I was 14 when I shot that. And when I've told people that, they get a little shocked. And it's like, oh, it might have been good to have somebody tell me that when I was 14, that this is a good photograph. That would have been really nice, having a mentor or someone do that.
Yeah.
Also, people are comparing it to like some Diane Arbus photographs. And I didn't know who she was when I was making those photographs. And I used to think that she was exploiting her subjects. But now I've come to realize, no, she really loved her subjects. She was not exploiting the children that she photographed. Those are pictures taken with love. And so photographically, I hope people see the progression of a young photographer, but also as a what it means to be human through those photographs, because John's story is a story we might all want to have for ourselves, but there's so many things that get in our way from being able to achieve that level of self-knowledge and freedom from judgment that he clearly had. He had always had the time of his life. Even when our parents died, he was like the guy who you couldn't not smile around John, because John just made things better. He wasn't being stupid or vulgar or insensitive, but he was John. And I think that's the humanitarian story coming out of the book. He was John.
And how can people get a copy?
Thank you. The website is greatpartypress.com. And, or you could go to my website, joedohertyphotography.com, and there is a link there to Great Party Press. Great Party Press Johnny was a big fan of The Shining, the movie, and there's a character in there near the end of the movie who has got, he's obviously dead. And he's got all this blood all over his face, and he's holding up a champagne glass and he's saying, "Great party, isn't it?" And so anywhere we were where there was some kind of party going on, John would recite that line. It was just like, who knows? Who knows what's going through his head?
Right.
So
totally.
we named the publisher after that.
So you created your own publishing company just for the book?
Yeah, bought ISBN numbers and everything because Velda needs to publish some things, and so we're going to use that as well. One of the reasons for that, if you're going to publish your own book, it doesn't cost much to get the ISBN numbers and go through all of that. But one of the reasons to have an imprint is because some places like Amazon will put you in the sort of the vanity or self-publishing category, which is different from, actually publishing your book. So you want to be in that category of a commercial press because you just get better looks.
Duly noted. And making some notes for myself now. Because I have the ISBN numbers, I just don't have my own publishing company, which is probably like a $50 LLC or something. So it's a good idea.
You don't even need to make an LLC. You just need a DBA.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's we have a corporation, and so it's part of that, but it's not necessary. You just make it up. Make sure nobody else has it. You go to the trademark office and just make sure that it's all yours.
I will do that maybe if I have time.
Yeah, well, Joe, right. It takes time.
Joe, this has been awesome. I have one final question for you. Who do you recommend for the podcast? Who are some people that inspire you that our listeners need to learn more about?
Well, so Jerry Dodrell, who I've mentioned before. Jerry is now leading the workshops out of the Ansel Adams Gallery, in addition to doing some visionary wild work and things out of the workshops out of his own gallery in Bodega. And as I said before, Gary's a great photographer. He was one of Galen Rowell's assistants, and he's a great teacher. He's very patient, and he really can figure out what it is you need today, whether it's technical or emotional or inspirational. He's kind of right there with it. And the other one is the husband-wife team of Terry Donnelly and Mary Liz Austin. And they go way back. I mean, Jeff Foote just passed away, and they're part of that sort of dirtbag photographer community with Jeff Foote, Jack Dykinga, and all of those guys who were on the road 5-6 months out of the year, capturing America, populating textbooks and calendars and advertising, and in the film era. So they're shooting 4x5, of country roads, and they had to go out every year because every year it was going to be different. And they found ways to communicate with each other in a pre-email era about what was exploding right now. And so they were a very sort of cooperative community. They're pretty much retired. COVID kind of ended those travels for them. But I think that their stories about what life was like back then, when stock photography mattered and when just being on the road for that much time and what life was like, I think that would be very interesting to your listeners.
Brilliant. Well, Joe, this has been so much fun, and I just wanted to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to come talk to us, and wish you the best of luck with the book. I really do think people should check it out. It's a really fun read, and the images are really cool, and it's great to see the progression of your work through the images and also learn about your family. And I think it's just a really awesome thing that you've put together. Best of luck.
Thank you so much, Matt. It's been a pleasure. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining me for another great episode. If Joe's story resonated with you, I hope it nudges you to look at your own archives a little differently. What are you holding on to that deserves shaping, sequencing, and sharing? Don't wait for someday. Do something with the work. If you value these kinds of conversations and want this podcast to remain independent, ad light, and community supported, please consider joining us on Patreon. It truly is the backbone of this show. We've lost significant support over the past 2 years, and every new member helps to keep this thing sustainable and growing. A huge thank you to our newest Patreon supporters, including Merle Watkins, Sharon Drake, Ingrid Arnett, Carol Collette, Brenda Tharp, and Richard Coons. I'm incredibly grateful for each of you stepping up to support the show. And a little teaser, later this year, I'll be rolling out a brand new Patreon benefit that I'm genuinely super excited about. I think it's going to add a deeper layer of connection and value to this community, and I can't wait to share more with you soon. You can find everything that we discussed in the show notes, including links to Joe's book and everything else we discussed. And if you're enjoying the show, please consider supporting us before you binge on the next episode. Thanks for stopping in, collaborating with us, and listening. See you next week.